Tonight we are very, very honored to have with us Ngugi Thiong'o, renowned author of dozens of books of fiction, memoirs, plays, and more. He's here with us to discuss Minutes of Glory and Other Stories, a stunning collection of some of his best-loved work that spans his long career, newly released just this week by the New Press for the first time in America. Acclaimed as one of the greatest writers of our time by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Ngugi has been a finalist for the Man Booker Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and many others, and is currently the Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of California, Irvine. I couldn't be more excited to be welcoming this brilliant author and collection, so without further ado, please join me in putting your hands together for Minutes of Glory and Ngugi Thiong'o.
Thank you. Yeah. So, go on? Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let me test. Testing. 5, 4. Is what? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad to be. I don't know what, I think I've read here before, not in this room, but in the room where there are all those stacks of books, because I still remember that one. Yeah, and this was, I think, Wizard of the Crow, I think. I read it here, yeah, several years ago, yeah. So I'm glad to be back. When I taught at NYU, the Strand used to be one of the bookshops that I would normally visit. Yeah, so I'm very fairly familiar. For me, it's like coming back home, yeah. I will start by apologizing because of my voice. I was in Kenya, where I was, for the last 3 weeks of February, I was in my home country, Kenya, promoting my new book, my first attempt at an epic called Kedamuyuru, The Perfect Nine. It's not yet in English, it's Nigikoyo, but there was plenty of sunshine. Then as soon as I came back, I had to go to Detroit, where there was snowstorm. So from sunshine to snowstorm, the result is I developed this dry cold and cough. So it has affected my voice. And occasionally, I apologize beforehand. If I start coughing all over, I'll try not to cough. I've got a lot of handkerchiefs. Yeah, right. Let me start by actually introducing my publisher. He's hiding over here, or my publishers. Thanks to them, New Press, who have done my last 3 books and who continue investing in my work, particularly in bringing about this particular collection of short stories under the title Minutes of Glory. Yeah. In a way, it's not quite a new collection. It's both old and new. Let me explain. Some of the stories were previously published, not here, but elsewhere under the title Secret Lives. But when I came to have it reissued here in America with an imprint of New Press, Carl persuaded me to do something which I was not intending to do. You know, he asked me, "Do you have more stories so we can add to the old collection?" And I could not think of, because I had stopped writing stories in English, and all the stories I had were mostly in Kikuyu language with a few translations, you know. But I had 2 special ones which I had written in English, and I was not intending to really, they were just for the enjoy. I'll explain later in what context I wrote those two stories, okay? So it is both new collection and also old, it's combination. So together, it is a new collection, together as one package, okay? And they form my literary autobiography. So I'll talk a little bit about the stories and then read from one or two stories and then questions here. The first story, let me see my notes. The first story in this collection is called Mugumo. In English, the fig tree. In fact, the original title, when it was originally published, was the fig tree. Then I changed the fig tree to the Gikuyu name of it, Mugumo, but means the fig tree. This actually is my first, well, maybe the second, but among the first attempts at fiction. Let me explain how this came about. I was a student. I think it was my first year as a student of English at Makerere University College, which was then an overseas college of the University of London. And they had a departmental magazine called Pen Point, who was publishing stories by fellow students. And those who published in the magazine, of course, were very famous within our circle, of course, right? And there's one from Kenya, Jonathan Carriera. I think he was then either the editor or one of the editors. So one day, I meet him in the corridors of the campus. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this iconic figure, and I'm lost for words. So he says, are you the James Ngugi we have been hearing so much about? I did not know what he was talking about. So later I learned that he was in the fourth year, I was in the first year, but the professor of literature had read one of my essays to them to show them how a literary essay should be written. But I did not know that at the time. So I told him, lost for words. Then I blurted out the first words from my mouth. Excuse me, Mr. Carriera. I've written a short story. Would you like to look at it? I thought he would say, oh, yes, sometime. But no, he was very interested. Yes. Do you have it? Uh-oh. I did not have it because I had not written it. So I promised to bring it. So that night, I'd sit down and wrote the story. So the next time, I gave it to him. He looked at it, he liked it, made some comments, which were very useful to me. In the original version, it was just an episode. So he just told me a story something must happen in a story. You just cannot say, I went to New York and back. What happened in New York? Did what happened change your life, or did it make a difference, or whatever? Yeah. And that was a very important hint I got from my fellow student, my senior. And so later I revised the story and became, so it's one of the, part of the collection. I'm very proud of it. Yeah. Published in 1960, right? Yeah. The next group of short stories, and this was the beginning of a few others, group of short stories that I've grouped under the title of Mothers and Children. Yeah. The second section is a group of stories which I group under the title Fighters and Martyrs. Yeah. And these stories deal a bit more with my life in Kenya at the time. Let me explain. I was born in 1938 in Kenya. Kenya was a British settler colony, meaning there was a British settlement in Kenya. And as in all settler colonies in the world, the land issue was very important in the politics and culture, of the country. In 1952, there was a war of liberation led by Kenya Land and Freedom Army, popularly known as Mau Mau, and a state of emergency was declared. So I lived, my youth was under that state of emergency. My own brother, the one who is ahead of me, was actually in the mountains fighting. So I was caught in that whole thing, one way or another, right? So these stories that come under the grouping Fighters and Martyrs, really deal with that period of my life. But there's one I want to draw your attention to, called The Return. The Return is actually very, very important in my life. Those of you who have read my memoir called In the House of the Interpreter, we might remember the first chapter when I returned home from a dormitory, or rather, one of the residency college or schools, and I go back home thinking that I am going to meet my mother and my brothers and tell them about my adventures in this new school called Alliance High School. So I was dreaming what I would tell them, and I could picture the smiles on my mother's face and things like that, only to go back home and find that the entire village had been razed to the ground. And I had no idea. In those days, there was no computers, no emails, remember? No social media. So I had no idea what had happened. I just found my entire village razed to the ground. And I did not know where the family was relocated. And it's not just my family, the whole community had been relocated into a concentration village somewhere else, That's what was traumatic for me at the time. Is like all the expectations and everything else. So I drew from that emotion, I think, in writing the story, The Return, which is really about a Mau Mau fighter who has been placed in a concentration camp, and he's released, and he comes back home, and the reality, what he has in mind, he thinks that life, he'll just resume life where he left it. In other words, as if life had stopped or was frozen, and he was just coming back, reconnect, and go on with life. But he comes to find the changes are just too much. He can't recognize the village. Some people don't even recognize him anymore, and so on. So I drew on my own experiences to invest the story with emotion of the whole notion of expectation and reality becomes a very, very important theme in all my works, Now, but this story has other interesting biographical elements. I wrote the story in 1962, and in 1962, and it was published in in a college magazine, and a new literary journal called Translation, which started in Kampala at the time, but continues to the present day in Harvard. So it continues. It's a very important journal. Now, on the basis of this story, The Return, I was invited to the famous conference of writers of English expression at Makerere. It was 1962. And this conference brought together many of the leading African writers of the time, published, that is, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Louis Nkosi, Kofi Awuna, and many others. All of them already published, right? Me, I'm a student, second year, and my achievement was just literally Mugumo, the fig tree, which I told you about, and The Return. But The Return had drawn attention to my whatever they thought of me anyway, but enough to get me an invitation to that conference. Okay. Now, to get my work discussed at the conference was by all these writers, like you feel, oh my God, it's true? Am I being discussed? Very seriously? And they're arguing about my work, right? And guess who else was there? Among those present, among them was Langston Hughes was there, you see, yeah, and so it's my ego, well. And you can imagine, it was actually wonderful having my short story being, discussed, Later, Langston Hughes asked me to take him to see Kampala. And I was thinking I would take him to see all the glories of modern Kampala, cathedrals and other wonders of the modern city. But when we walked and he found some place which was like a, run-down area, we called it Wandegea. It was kind of where artisans were making pots, drunkards, and and a lot of music, noise, and so on. He wanted to see that place, and I couldn't figure out why would this very big writer of Harlem Renaissance fame want just to stop here. In fact, I never got a chance to show him the glories of modern cathedrals and so on, because he was much more fascinated by the regular life of ordinary men and women in that rundown area, and that was very important. That to see him reacting in that way later was very, very important to me, right? So I associate The Return with an encounter with Langston Hughes, of Harlem Renaissance, The next section of stories, I grouped them under the title Secret Lives. This is what happened. I graduated from Makerere University College in 1964. I was a journalist for a little while, and then went to England. This was soon after Kenya regained her independence in 1963, December. And in April 1964, I was off to England to study in Leeds. When I came back in 1967, 68, I found so many changes. Again, the whole idea of expectation and reality. My return was so much had taken place in the village and so on. And for instance, one of the things which fascinated me was the rise of drinking places, and hard liquor had been banned for Africans during the colonial era and so on. So I find all the drink places, and I find women working in bars and so on. It was all very strange to me, right? And this produced a group of short stories called Secret Lives. including the title, Minutes of Glory, okay? I'll not read from Minutes of Glory, but it's a story which has been discussed quite a lot. How shall I describe it? Just that, Minutes of Glory. So just read it and enjoy the Minutes of Glory, I think, yeah? Right? Yeah. But this was also accompanied by another one I called Mercedes' Funeral. And I want to read from that one, actually, a Mercedes' Funeral. And this concerns, generally, I don't know how to describe this one, but it's concerns a person working in a bar, but he's full of dreams of higher education. And the narrator and him used to know each other, but they have taken different paths. The narrator has been to Makerere and other places, and he's coming back. But Wahinya, the main character, still has those dreams of one day becoming educated and so on. But the conditions around him militate against his dreams and so on. The section which I'm going to read from you is the section where the narrator is describing his own life at Makerere and the expectations that came with independence, right? This is very important because this is my first depiction, really, of the rise of the elite, post-colonial elite, okay? The formation, yeah. Now, I say, I'm excited at being Makerere. And then, during that time, Uhuru, meaning freedom, also came to our countries. Uhuru means independence. Uhuru, oh, we sang and danced and wept. Tomorrow, cha-cha-cha. Uhuru, freedom, cha-cha-cha. We streamed into the streets of Kampala. We linked hands and chanted, freedom, cha-cha-cha. It was a kind of collective madness, I remember. And those women with whom we linked our loins knew it and gave themselves true. The story was the same for each of us. But none of us, I'm quite sure, that night fully realized the full import of what had happened. This we knew in the coming years, and perhaps Wahinya, the main character, but not the one the narrator is talking about, had been right. And what years, my Lord! Strange things we heard and saw. Most of those who had finished Makerere College were now being trained as district officers, labor officers, diplomats, foreign service, all European jobs. Uhuru, cha-cha-cha! Uhuru, cha-cha-cha! Others were now on the boards of Shell, Caltex, Esso, and other oil companies. We could hardly wait for our turn. Uhuru, freedom, cha-cha-cha. Some came for the delayed graduation ceremonies. They came in their dark suits, their cars, and red-lipped ladies in heels. They talked of their jobs, of their cars, of their employees, of their mahogany-furnished offices, and of course, their European and Asian secretaries. So, this was true. No longer the rumors about what independence will bring, no longer the unbelievable stories of new riches. And we were next in the queue. Yeah. So he's describing his own elitist ambitions as against the reality of Wahinya, the character. You can read what happens, okay? Just teasing you a little bit. Yeah. The story is called Mercedes' Funeral. Mercedes being the symbol of the car that became the symbol of having a ride for the new elite. You know, I don't know what you have here. Is Cadillac? I don't know what. Is there a car which is a symbol of, or is it a boat, or is it a house? Huh? Rolls Royce or something, you know. Yeah, you know, with us, Mercedes-Benz was our symbol of success and wealth and so on. And yeah, Mercedes. In fact, I have another story where I talk about Mercedes tribesmen. Yeah, okay. But I want to read really from the last two stories which I wrote. Now, there's a gap, many years. And then I eventually, many things happened to my life, blah, you know, prison, University of Nairobi, then prison, then exile, then New York University here, and so on. And I end up in California. 10 years I was teaching here. Then I ended up in California. In California, my daughter and my son were born in New Jersey, but they grew up in California. And every Christmas, we try to exchange stories for Christmas instead of gifts, you know. Instead of material gifts, you come up with a story, a poem, or a performance. And I liked it very much. But I have to warn you, it's not, they also like the stories and so on, but they still had an eye on the actual material gifts to accompany. Okay, but ironically, the stories remain, the material gifts vanished. But whether they did, whether a piece of painting or whatever, we still have all that, you know. Yeah. So the first story, which I'm going to read from, is actually a little bit from, it's called The Ghost of Michael Jackson. Okay, in our village, that is, not in America. This story, I wrote for my daughter, I think, for my son. Yeah, for my son. I call it Season's Gift for December 25th, 2011, and the same story extended for the same gift in 2012, twice, all right? Yeah, that goes. And this is a story I was told of a Catholic priest, a young man, who apparently was a very holy look. He was revered by the older people and so on in the village as a young, handsome, young priest, very holy looking. But on the weekends, he used to don the uniform of Michael Jackson, the hat and the trousers, which with the socks, white socks showing here, okay? And he would do moon walking. This, and apparently he would win, and he would wear ordinary, not Catholic robes, but now ordinary young person's clothes. And this annoyed the other rivals for the young ladies, because they were wondering, I mean, he is a revered priest, and now he's winning all the hearts of the young ladies. And also this is very unfair, especially because they could not, if they told their parents that he was moonwalking, they would never believe them. So they had to live with a secret, but they couldn't reveal it, because nobody, they might even be beaten for thinking so badly, or they are priest and so on. Yeah. So this formed the basis of my story, the ghost of Michael Jackson. And I'll just read a little bit. The main character really is a young kid of about 11 or 12 who can see visions, okay? And he can see in the dark. That's when he sees things, So he keeps on seeing a priest drinking, and he does not know what to do. But at the same time, he thinks it's a very bad thing for him to keep quiet. He thinks it might be a sin to keep quiet about the visions he has been seeing. So on church one day, when the priest has spoken about people drinking and how sinful it is for people to drink and that kind of thing, the young man called Mo, M-O, goes to see him at a confession, okay? So within minutes, Mo, hello, can you hear me? Yeah. You want me to raise my voice? Hello? Okay. Within minutes, Mo was standing outside the confessional window, ahead of a line that included many women who were very, very pious. Framed by the tiny window with dotted holes, Mo stared into a transfiguration, that's of the priest. A rainbow halo, H-A-L-O, hung around the hallowed window, behind which sat or stood the priest, whose disjointed, glinting eyes could be seen through the holes. More could picture, even feel the intense light emanating from the eyes that watched him, which raised more doubts and more, tying his tongue. How was it possible that a man who the night before wallowed in his vomit, shit, and urine could be the calm, collected, handsome presence whose voice made women swoon and men feel uplifted? Why pursue silhouettes of dreams at night? It's okay, my son, to lay down the burden in your heart. The voice behind the window encouraged him. More cleared his throat. I'm clearing for real, by the way. More cleared his throat. Forgive me, Father, for you have sinned and come short of the glory of the Lord. Oh, my son, you have the order of the words wrong. The padre corrected him gently. The words are, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned and come short of the glory of God. More, I forgive you, Father, for you have sinned and come short of the glory of God, Mo said. No, said the priestly voice with infinite patience. Just confess, son, just confess without preliminaries. Father, I'm a little scared, Mo said. I fear what will happen to me. Oh, don't fear. Come ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. What is it that scares you? You see, God once cursed Ham for seeing his father naked, and not doing something about it. More said in a tone between a question and a statement. Yes, said the priest. Yeah, that he did, and lay the burden of blackness on Ham and his children forever. Jesus changed all that. His grace redeemeth Ham's repentant children and maketh them whiter than snow. Wash me, Redeemer. Wash me, Redeemer. Wash me, Redeemer. And shall be whiter than snow. Come now, and let us reason together, said the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. That's from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. I hear you, Father. Do you think it is a sin to watch a priest awash in ochre and not do something about it? Oh, no, and yes, my son, but Father, I assure you that unlike Ham, I tried to warn you. But since I didn't actually say anything, son, take care you don't sin against the Holy Spirit, said the priest with a slightly, bemused tone. When was this Ham business? Yeah. Anyway, you can read the rest for yourself, okay? Right. Yeah. The last one I'm going to read is actually, again, this one I wrote for my daughter. Where was I? I think I was in Cape Town at the time. And she wanted a story so badly. So I sat down in my hotel, Cape Town near Table Mountain. This was, I think, June 2012. Oh, this was for her birthday. Okay, Moby. And this one, I remembered my younger brother. We were 1 year apart, but later I lost him to a car accident. We were very, very close, you know. But I don't know why his memory came to my mind. And I remember one contest we used to have, or that we had with him. So let me just read a little bit, okay? The story is called Without a Shadow of Doubt, my first lesson in art and film. Jinjo, that's actually his real name, Jinjo, my younger brother, claimed he could catch his own shadow. Older by a year, I was not about to admit that I was less able. A rivalry of sorts grew into a sibling race to be the first to achieve the fate. With the grim but eager determination of bounty hunters, we set out to capture our shadows. They proved very cunning. They would run away from us, but annoyingly kept the same speed as we did, accelerating when we did, slowing down when we did, and stopping when we did. We'd set to run away from them. The same pattern ensued. They followed us, doing whatever we did, literally at the same time and speed that we did it. Let us carry a load on our heads, in our hands, on our backs, or push the rim of a bicycle wheel. Our shadows would come up with an exact replica. On moonlight nights, they were there, walking behind us, in front of us, beside us, mocking our failure to turn them into captives. We escaped them only when it became dark. Initially a matter of pride at our doing it, but as soon as we sat by the fireside, they were back. Alas, it was not we who had escaped them, but rather they who had hidden in the darkness, only to reappear suddenly and dramatically at storytelling time. They played on the walls, on our faces, and depending on the flames, they would actually dance Sometimes they would multiply themselves and continue mocking us in moves and waves that seemed choreographed to achieve maximum mockery. Yeah. I don't want to read the whole thing, but there's one. The argument go on until and then we came question of the color of shadows, and the argument was, I think my brother was saying, black. Our shadows looked black, so we assumed if our shadows were black and we were black, then white people's shadows would be white. Right. So how are you going to prove that? It was not easy to come across a white person in those days, because they lived in their mansions or wherever, So we decided first to try it with Indian. They may not have been as white themselves, but maybe the color of their shadow might give us a clue, okay? So we go to the Indian shops, shopping center, and we follow, and we see, wait a minute, their shadows don't look very much different than ours. But then we realize, but Indian are not quite white as white people themselves. Yeah? So we waited, wondering, but whites, real white shadows. And then good luck fell upon us. A white couple drove past in a car in the Indian shops. A rare sight this. We made good with the Indian children who surrounded the vehicle to see the couple come out. The children commented on their clothes, shoes, and jewelry, their gait. They were real Europeans with sun helmets to shield themselves from the sun. The couple walked out with stiff dignity, almost brushing aside the anthropological gaze from the other, but occasionally acknowledging it with attempts to deflect it by throwing some coins some distance away. They briefly watched the children run after the treasure, but a few would not take part in the scramble, almost as if these rejected the attempts to turn them into the object of gaze. But my brother and I were interested in one thing only, their shadows. Alas, theirs crossed with those of the people still surrounding the couple. Thereafter, the couple walked under the veranda, where their shadows became indistinct from those of the roofs of the buildings. Even after all the other children had satisfied their curiosity and gone away, we too did not give up and stalked them from one grocery to the next. The white pair tried to throw us off by flinging some coins on the ground. We did not budge. We needed their shadows, not their coins. We wanted the pair to come out of the cover of the veranda into the light. Eventually, they did come out of the verandas. We followed them toward their car. And then we saw their shadows, clear, distinct. Alas, theirs behaved like ours and the Indians, and they were as dark as ours. It was not enough for my brother and I, and we kept on following the pair, expecting their real shadows to somehow appear. Out of curiosity, the couple stopped and beckoned us. The woman took some candy. We shook our heads. "What do you want?" "Shake your hands," my brother blurted out, casting a glance at me. I knew the meaning of that glance. The woman carefully put on her gloves and with a bemused look extended a gloved hand to my brother. I was not looking at the handshake. I concentrated on the shadows on the ground. Then it was my turn to shake hands with the equally bemused gentleman who did not bother to put on a glove. My brother did what I had done, concentrated on the shadows. We arrived at the same thought. We went home silent, nobody arguing, nobody claiming victory, not even discussing the reaction of the white people to our request. But we were united by a discovery that needed no words. They called the village together, and you can read the rest. Right? Yeah, I think I'll end up there, yeah, so this is my collection under the title, Minutes of Glory. Okay.
Thank you so much. If that's all right with you, we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah,
so
please.
I'll bring the mic around. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Thank you for going first.
Habari yako Ngugi?
Hey, jema.
Nikuulize swali kwa Kiswahili ama Kizungu?
Uliza kwa Kiswahili, nitatafsiri mimi mwenyewe.
Okay.
He's asking me, how are you? Should I ask you in Kiswahili or in English? So I told him, try Kiswahili, I'll do the interpretation.
Na maswali actually mawili.
I've got two questions here.
Mimi ni Mkenya, so.
From Kenya, like you.
Nilisoma kwamba ulisema ni unataka kuandika kwa Kikuyu.
But actually, you have to save time.
Yes.
You can do it in English.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You wrote that you wanted to write more in Kikuyu, and this is based on your writing and also the interview you did with The Guardian a few years ago about your desire to write purely in your native language and your encouragement for other writers to do the same. But as a Kenyan, as a person who's not Kikuyu, don't you think it's limiting for me not to be able to read your work just because you've written it in one specific language that I cannot access it? So that's the first part of the question.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the second is, what is your perspective now, post your imprisonment as a political prisoner in 1978? How is your relationship with the Kenyan state at the moment?
Okay.
And what do you think about the current political situation back home? Thank you.
Actually, I've just come from Kenya, so for 3 weeks. And as I told you, I was actually touting my new epic. My first attempt at an epic is called Kedamoyuru, or The Perfect Nine. And I'm told it might be published. Carl, when did you say you want to publish it?
Next year sometime.
Next year sometime. So you don't access it. Don't ask me. Ask him. Yeah. But writing in African languages, I feel very strongly about it. In fact, you may have read an article in Los Angeles Review of Books, I think, and it dubbed me the language warrior. So I was in India recently, Calcutta, and a delegation came from some of the community languages, and they were asking about what I do as a language warrior, whether I carry a shield and a spear. But how should I start? First, I want to tell you very, very briefly how I came. I've got so many stories to say about this. Let me tell a few, if you don't mind. Can you give me just 2 minutes? Yeah, please. Yeah, and I'll tell you a story. First of all, I want to go back to Leeds University. In Leeds University, I'm writing my third novel called A Grain of Wheat. But at the same time, in 1966, I'm invited to New York, my first time ever in New York. And it's a conference of writers from all over the world, including writers from Eastern Europe or the communist Europe who are being allowed into America for the first time. There are many other writers from Latin America, including Pablo Neruda, and other writers we associate with what they call Latin American Renaissance, okay? Fuertes and others were there, right? I was a guest of honor, regional guest of honor. There were regional guests of honor. And I was a regional guest of honor from Africa. Arthur Miller, I remember, was the president at the time of International PEN. And now, again, just like in 1962 when Langston Hughes was in a conference which was discussing my work, I was in a similar situation. Although I had published 2 novels, Weep No Child and The River Between, I still could never quite bring myself to describe myself as a writer. And yet I'm in New York for the first time, actually around New York University, as a writer. And there are all these big writers, there. And I was wondering how, I'm trying to play the writer. How do writers sit like this? Or do they do like that? Or do they do like that? Or do they look at the sky? Or what do they do? So I'm so much into poses that I'm not really following the proceedings of the conference, or the regional guest of honor. I'm enjoying everything, being in this company, all these writers, And then I think it was the last panel held by, it was Arthur Miller, I know, was presiding over the panel. But the other 2 members of the panel was Pablo Neruda and Ignacia. He was an Italian writer. Sloan, yeah. He wrote the novel called Bread and Wine. Ignacia Sloan, S-L-O-A-N-E, yeah, Ignacia Sloan. Yeah. And Sloan was talking, remember, I'm now into Socratic pose, right? Right? So I'm not hearing what's going on because I'm enjoying the Socratic pose, all right? And then I hear, I think Sloan was complaining something about Italian writing not being as readily translated into English or other Western European languages, and he was saying, and then he said something like, and Italian is not like one of these Bantu languages with 1 or 2 words in their vocabulary. Oh my God. Gone was the Socratic pose. I'm now fighting how to the honor of Africa is under attack, and I'm a regional guest of honor of the continent. I was speaker for the continent, and said, I was jumped up literally. I didn't even wait to be asked to speak. I just told, look, I can assure you that African languages have more than just 2 words in their vocabulary. And I'm fuming. Come out. I must say Arthur Miller was very nice, diplomatic, because he said people can praise their own languages, but they don't have to do it to run down, badmouth other people's languages. But you are free to say whatever you want to say about your own language. So I really appreciated that, Then I traveled to America. I was still having those in mind, but at least I had spoken in honor of the continent. So I feel much better this time, okay? So I moved over to Leeds, and now to resume my novel, A Grain of Wheat. Wait a minute. But in what language was writing this novel? In English. And I just told the whole world that African languages have more than 2 words in their vocabulary. That was actually a very dramatic moment for me. And though eventually I did finish a grain of wheat, the language question kind of troubling me a lot. I wrote quite a bit about that experience. But it was not until I returned to Kenya. I published the next 2 novels in English, A Grain of Wheat and then Petals of Blood. And then in Kenya, in 1977, I wrote a play in Gikuyu language for the first time to be performed by villagers, working people in the village, peasants, farmers, and, factory workers, And there's no way I was going to do a play in English for the community. I had to write in the language which they spoke. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it with them, okay? Right. The play I'll Marry When I Want was later stopped in November 1977 by the Kenyan government of the time. And on December 31st, 1977, armed police came and surrounded my house in a village. I used to live in a village at the time, working in Nairobi as professor of literature, chair of the department even, and then returning home in the evening, surrounded my house and grabbed, well, they didn't grab me, but they took me to, as their guest of honor in Kamete maximum security prison. So yesterday of 1977, I was professor at the University of Nairobi, professor of English, author of acclaimed novels like River Between, Weep Not Child, A Grain of Wheat, Petals of Blood even, right? And January 1st, 1978, I am a prisoner without a name, a number only. Okay? That was another great moment in my linguistic journey, because I began to wonder how is it possible that an African government can put me in prison for writing in an African language, right? So that was a starting point of my really thinking more deeply about the unequal power relationship between languages. And this does not come about by itself. It's a result of historical intervention, in this case colonial. And I realized quite briefly that in every colonial situation, or in every situation of the oppressed and the oppressed, among other measures taken, in addition to military and political, the other strong measure taken is the denigration of the people's languages, almost anywhere, And let me just tabulate quite a few quickly, right? Yeah, Ireland, the same thing. When they could not, the English could not. Ireland was England's first sort of colony, settler colony. When they could not subjugate the Irish, a very famous English poet called Spencer came with a book called A View of Ireland at the present time. Is a visiting lord, talking to an English settler, and they're saying, why is after all these centuries we've not been able to conquer the Irish? Okay? And they come up with a very simple solution. Well, there's get and their naming system, get rid of O's and what they call O's and marks. That's one thing. And then get at their language. Okay? And if you do that, they will soon forget who they are. That one is actually in writing. You can read even now, okay? Very quickly, let me go to when Africans were taken from the continent, enslaved in the New World or in the Caribbean plantations and American plantations. Among other measures, in addition to being branded here, like cattle, the other element of branding was their names taken away and given the names of the plantation owner, expressing a relationship between them and the plantation owner. But the next thing was abolition of African languages. They could not speak their languages. And some of those who spoke their languages were actually hanged, okay? And their language, including the talking drum from West Africa, even that one was banned, okay? Right, language. Let me give you 2 more examples very quickly. Subjugation of Native Americans, for some of you may know, you do know a school called Carlisle. It's in Pennsylvania. Carlisle, right? Carlisle was founded in 1823 by one Captain Pratt. And in Canada, they call them residence schools, okay? Dorms, okay? Where you get children, you approve from their mothers and whatever, you bring them there and you engineer them into something else, okay? The whole idea of the dormitory is like you take them from their cultural environment, you come and do something else, and they come out something new, okay? This is what happened to Native American, taken from the West, probably from California, I don't know, to Carlisle School. Within the first 3 days of their arrival, they are given something to point at the blackboard, and there are marks there. You point the mark, and you point, and then the piece of paper is put on your back, right? And so on and so forth. And those are English names. They just pick randomly. Whichever you point at is now your name. And the next thing was language. Captain Pratt later was to actually talk about the philosophy that made him do that. He said, this one you can actually Google, is to kill the Indian and save the man, okay? I don't know what to go into this. I can go to India in 1843 when they were trying to introduce English as a means of education in an India which already had a history of writing Sanskrit, okay? And Captain Macaulay said clearly that the reason they were doing that, soon after the Indian mutiny, or the Indian, well, they don't call it mutiny, but they call it something, First War of Independence or whatever, he said, we are doing this because we want to create a class of Indians who are Indian in religion, in clothes, color of the skin, but with an English mind, right? And the reason we're doing this is because we want them to become to help us in governing this vast population. Okay? I'll give you one more example, please. Japan colonized Korea in 1910 to 1945. What did they do? They banned Korean names, and Japanese names and Japanese language, right? Yeah, they tried to do the same thing in Singapore, although they were only there for 2 years, where they temporarily defeated the British there, and they tried to do the same thing, but they were there for a very short time. Okay. We can talk about Maori people, the same thing. We talk about the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots. The same pattern over and over and over and over again. So I came to realize that language is very important. There's a reason why they systematically, all of them, went at people's languages, okay? Some of those thoughts are the ones which later became the book, Decolonizing the Mind. Yeah. And in prison, as you know, that's when when I feel something is wrong, I don't try to repeat it. When I find that I could no longer carry the name James, for instance, I just could not have it anymore. I put it in an envelope, folded it, and said, return to the sender. Return to sender, okay? The same thing I feel now having seen, like a vision, having seen this, I could not bring myself to write another novel in English. I wrote in Gikuyu language my first novel, which is called Devil on the Cross in English, okay? And my whole experience of that is in my memoir called Wrestling with the Devil. Because I wrestled with all those devils, of negativity towards my language and towards other people's languages and so on, And the result was Devil on the Cross, okay? Yeah, so that's briefly my journey towards the decision which I made. So my first work in Gikuyu language was in Kamete maximum security prison on toilet paper. And since then, I've not turned my back on my decision. All my novels, short stories, drama have been in Kikuyu. But guess what? Devil on the Cross, written in Kikuyu, was later available in Kiswahili, Shetani Musalabani. Much later, it was available in English as Devil on the Cross. So where is the loss? You can still read it in English, or in your case, Kiswahili, for instance. You see, what I'm trying to say is no contradiction whatsoever in writing in your own language and getting and having your work accessed by others. There may be a delay, but so what? I have read Russian literature, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. I read them in English translation. I've read a lot of Greek philosophers, and so we study them anyway through English translation. The Bible, which has affected you and me and maybe other people, Quran as well, we don't read it in the original. We read it, at least in my case, I read it in translation. Okay, and it's impacted the lives of thousands and thousands of people through translation. Indeed, the Bible even affected the growth of English language itself, and German, French, and so on. Okay, so I don't want to go into this because I can talk about the whole day, but I came to that realization, and have seen how African people, African elite, will become prisoners of this situation. And in Kenya, when I was going around to promote my new epic, I was telling people everywhere I went this sentence, because I wanted to have only one sentence, that if you know all the language of the world and you don't know your language or the language of your culture, that's enslavement. Okay, that's one. On the other hand, if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, and then add all the other languages to it, that is empowerment, And I was saying, we are very lucky, we can have many languages. And many languages are actually the oxygen of culture. Monolingualism is the carbon. Let me give you another one. Monolingualism is a carbon monoxide of cultures. Okay? Multilingualism is the oxygen of cultures. That's why you see even one language tends to split into different, even English tends to split into, the natural tendency is for it to become Englishes. And the same with all languages that are alive and so on, they split. They don't contract. Okay, they keep on splitting and so on, right? So, anyway, in briefly, that's my that's my history of this, yeah. And I continue writing in Gikuyu, but I'm always hoping that my work will also be available. The way I would like it is, if I can get my work written in Gikuyu, then available in other African languages, and then in English and French. That's the order in which I would like to see them, okay? Let me give you one more last example. My short story called Ituikare Amorogaro, and this one you can literally Google, not right now, but afterwards, okay? Because I want to Google. It's called The Upright Revolution. The Upright Revolution, in English translation. In Gikuyu, is Ituikare Amorogaro. This story has now been published, translated into 78 languages in the world, 50 of them or so African languages, right? So it's a one story written in one African language which has been able to now to be available in 50 other African languages, I think 6 Asian languages, Indian languages, including Vietnamese, 6 European languages, and 1 native Mexican language, yeah, kind of thing. This one you can Google. Just go look at Jalada, Jalda, translation issue number 1. And you come to a website which has all those, and you can see them, the translations, and you can see the different scripts in which it has appeared. So it's possible for language to talk to each other, and they have always done so, right? The languages have always talked to each other, right? It's when they're put in a hierarchical relationship that becomes stifling. Like there's a difference between Carl here, sitting on on Diana, right? That's one kind of contact, okay? He's sitting on her, but she can't breathe, she'll be walking like they're carrying Carl, okay, right? But it's a different thing if there are linkages through linking hands, you see? Network, yeah, can you do that, you see? They are shaking hands, it's linking hands. Network, energy is to and fro. The other one is, right? That's hierarchy, okay? Network is a different kind of relationship, yeah. So we want network of languages and cultures, not hierarchy of languages and cultures. That, in brief, is my...
Cool. Thank you for your question, and Ngugi, thank you so much.